Welcome to the fifth video. So before we get into any coding, I'm just going to update our diagram here to kind of show you what we're going to be doing. So in this video, we're going to be creating a voxel types, or really voxel palette. And this is going to be a scriptable object. And if you don't know what a scriptable object is, you'll see in a second. But this is the voxel renderer is going to hold a reference to our voxel palette. And our voxel palette is going to store information for each voxel type. Rather than just using a material and setting it to color red, we can use our voxel palette and create many different types of voxels with different colors. All right, so this is going to be voxel palette, and in Unity it is going to inherit from scriptable object. You'll see what that is once we go ahead and open up Unity. And our voxel palette is going to store a voxel type array, and each voxel type is going to store for now, just a string as a name that is purely for us to differentiate them in the inspector. This is not going to be used at runtime. And then a color. And it's going to be a public and a public. And then in the voxel palette scriptable object, we're going to have a public array of voxel types called voxel types. And then whenever in our voxel renderer we are rendering a voxel, we can always say voxels, right? The voxel at x, y, and z, although we'd be using utils.index 3D, obviously, since that's a 1D array. And that would give us back our byte voxel, right? And then we'd pass that in to our voxels array. We'd get the voxel out, which would be like 0 for air, 1 for sand. And in our voxel renderer, we would have a reference to our voxel palette. And to get a color, we're going to say palette index. We're going to index the palette as if it was an array. Or we could say the voxel types, although what we're going to be doing is creating a public indexer, which will take in an integer, and it'll give us back return the voxel types at the index, right? This is a thing that we're going to do in, this is not exactly what the syntax looks like, I'm just doing this to give you an idea, but that way we don't have to say dot palette dot voxel types and then index that array. We can just go palette and index it. But yeah, anyway, palette, and then that'll get us a specific voxel type in the palette, and then we can say dot color. So that's how we're going to get a color for each voxel type. I'm just going to add a comment, color for each voxel type. All right, I'll see you in there. All right, so let's get started. So to do this, I'm going to create a new C# script, and I'm going to call it a voxel palette. And once it finishes compiling, we're going to open this up, and instead of inheriting from mono behavior, we're going to make this a scriptable object. And then I'm going to create a menu, a create asset menu, and the file name is going to be, by default, it's going to be a voxel, a new voxel palette. And the menu name, where it's going to show up in our create menu, is voxels/voxel palette. All right, let's delete this. Now, our voxel palette is going to store information for each voxel type. So we're going to need a array of voxel types. Let's do this. Say public voxel type array voxel types. All right, and then we're going to create a public voxel type. This is also going to be a struct voxel type. And a voxel type, we're just going to do string name, public string name. This is purely for us in the inspector to just give it a name to remember by. And then public color, and that's it. And then we also need to using system, and then we need to add the serializable attribute to this struct so that it actually shows up in the inspector and it can serialize the voxel type. All right, so now if we go into Unity, and let's go ahead and create a folder called scripts. Now let's move all of our scripts for our voxels into here and create another folder called, once it loads, palettes. And in here, you see if we go to create, we have this voxel palette. And I'm just going to call this default, or just voxel palette for now. Now, what voxel palette is going to let us do is we can create different voxel types. So I'm going to create one, and I'm going to call it, what am I going to call this? Sand and water. So sand, make sure that the alpha value is all the way up, otherwise we might end up with something transparent. And then just go ahead and set that to a sandy kind of burnt color. All right, and then water as well, blue, deeper blue. Let's do deeper blue. There we go. All right, and then let's just delete this last element. All right, that should be all. Now, since air is 0 and voxel types at 0, so if we try to get, say, if we try to get voxel types 0, we're going to get sand, not air. So to fix this, I'm going to create a public this indexer, and it's going to get, and I think I'm doing this right, confirmed how we're going to do this. So it's going to return a voxel type, and it's going to index this with an int ID, and this ID is just going to be the ID of the voxel, or the index of the voxel. And we are going to return voxel types at ID -1. For some reason, this is still not working. Let me see, what do I need to do here? Oh, so it is get. So we need to turn this into a get and return. There we go. All right, so this is weird, but basically we can say voxel palette. Later we'll be able to say voxel palette, and we'll just index it directly like that. Yeah. All right, so we've got our voxel types. Now I need to figure out how we're going to implement this. Yeah, so here's what we're going to do. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get a reference to a private voxel palette. All right. Now, whenever I add a voxel in here, I can say, first we need to store a list of colors. Yeah, we'll just call this vertex colors, and it's one color per vertex. So let's just put this under vertices, and then under vertices here, we're going to need 4 vertex colors. So add, And what we can do is say voxel palette, and sorry, palette index by the current voxel, like that. Now, why is this not working? Voxels palette, sorry, palette.color. So in our palette, we get the current voxel based on the voxels, right? And say dot color. And we only do this if we're not equal to 0, because in here we're subtracting 1. So the ID, for example, for air, if we put in air, it's going to be 0 and minus 1. That's negative 1. So we're doing this because we don't want to have a voxel type for air. So the smallest number we should ever put in here is 1, and 1 minus 1 equals 0, which will give us the first voxel type. And then in here, we're going to just say if, and actually, no, you know what? We'll just let that throw an error. So if you, yeah, so let's do a try catch. So if this throws an error, right, which it will, then we can also say, so if it throws an error, debug.log, and we're going to say log warning error, voxel type, voxel ID of 0 is for air. Do not index the voxel palette using with air voxels. All right. And if catch does catch, then we'll return a voxel type, and let's just create a public static voxel type default. And actually, let's just call this one air. And we're going to set equal to new voxel type with the color equal to color.black, and the name equal to nothing because it doesn't really matter. We're not going to see it. And we could just say voxel type dot air type. Yeah, we'll just say air. That's an air voxel. All right, and then yeah, that's all for now. So we got that now in our voxel renderer. Let's just go ahead and do 4 of those. So 1 vertex color for each of the vertices. And with that, right, in the voxels, just make sure you set the voxel palette. That is something I forgot to do. Okay, so now if we click play, and I hold space down, sand false. Now you might think, hey, it's working, sand, but really, if I go into the material and I change this to red, you're going to see that it comes out red. And so the reason for this is that even though in our renderer, voxel renderer, we are adding vertex colors in here, we have not set them here. So set vertex buffer params, set colors. So we're going to say colors is going to equal colors dot to array, and that's vertex colors. All right. So even though I just did that, it's still not going to work. Just to prove it, I'll show you. And I was about to explain why, but then I saw my own error just now. But even if I click play, it's still not going to work. because, and I'll explain why, even though we're adding it to our mesh in here, the material that we are using for our mesh does not support vertex colors, right? This does not support vertex colors. So all we have to do for this is install shader graph and create a super duper simple shader with literally 2 nodes, and we'll have it working. So go to Window, Package Manager, and install shader graph. And I already have it installed, so just going to leave it as that. And then I'm going to go into Art, and I'm going to create another folder called Shaders. And then I'm going to create a, and if I go all the way down to Rendering URP Environment, where is it? Shader graph, URP lit shader, and it really doesn't matter which one you do. Okay, so this is just going to be a default vertex color. Yeah, and that's pretty much all it's going to do. And I can open shader editor, and all we have to do in here for this to work is a simple, very simple solution. Get rid of the main preview. Material is lit, metallic, opaque. Okay, so we do need the main, we can leave the main preview, get rid of that. And all we got to do is add a property, call it a vector 3, and it's going to be color. Colors. Oh, actually, we don't even need to do that. Let's delete this. All you have to do is, and I need to connect my mouse here for a second. All you need to do is, and for shader graph, you are going to need a mouse because you need the middle mouse button to pan around. Create a node, call it vertex color, and literally just plug that vertex color into the out base color. And that is it. That is it. We have finished our shader. So now just click Save Asset, and we can make it small, go into our scene, go to our default material, and change it from this shader to our shader graphs, and I called it default vertex colors. Let's just select that. There's no options, but now if you have set that as your shader as your material in here in the Voxel renderer, when we click play, vertex colors should be working now. So let's see. And they are. You saw it was blue for a second because shader graph was loading, but yeah. So we've got voxel types. And now in the next video, I will show you how to add support for multiple automata or voxel automata types. I'll see you there.